Hey, welcome to Full Moon Podcast. This is a production of Elisha Bones Ministry, bringing you the truth of eschatology. And I'm your host, Stephen Whitsitt. Okay, sit back and relax for the next 45 minutes or so and be ready to listen and to take to heart the things that are being said. And hopefully we will answer your questions about the end of days. And tonight's episode, we will be dealing with AD 70. Okay, so what is AD 70? Well, let's start with Matthew 24. And I want to lay this out. When it comes to eschatology, there are the two main passages that we all deal with, and that's the Olivet discourse, Matthew 24, and the book of Revelations. Still know why Matthew 24? Well, let's read just the first couple of verses. It says, Jesus left the temple. Now, let me set this up for you first. This is the last week of Christ's life before his death and then resurrection. This is when after he's come into Jerusalem, he's probably on a Friday that he's walked in to Jerusalem, and that was Palm Sunday, of course, that first day of the week that he came in here and was set up, and then you have some days that go by. But here is him sitting in the temple, and he's been visiting and doing things, and of course it's after he cleansed the temple, and you're putting these things together here from the different Gospels, but they had left. There was a few of them that were with Jesus. And as he left this temple one afternoon, they left the temple, going away, when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. Now, the buildings of these temples, of course, it was made up, you'll have to see a map someday, just go look at it, but big stone blocks made of gold, sat high next to everything. Just big gates, big doors, very fancy and elaborate temple. Herod had built this between 25 and 7 EC or AD, right there at the turn of the time from BC to AD, as you could say. And magnificent. He lined it with gold. And truly, this was just a spectacular building. And so as they were leaving it, he answered them. They were talking about how great this building was, but he answered, Jesus, you see all these things, do you not? You see everything here? I say to you, there will not be one left here, one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. So he's now prophesying and talking about a time when the temple would be destroyed. So, before you go on any further, he's Matthew 24, of course, then he's going to describe how are those days, what's going to happen, because he had walked across the Kidron Valley real close by and was on the Mount of Olives with these disciples, and they came to him privately saying, hey, tell us when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of this age? When's all this going to happen? What's the temple going to be doing? That's what we want to know. Because if the temple's torn down, then we lose the sacrificial system and all of that, and that's going to be the end of an age. That's going to be the ending of it all. And Jesus answered them, and he goes on and answers. So the question is that when you get down to, they want to know, when is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? And you go down to verse 36. Let's know. We go back up a little bit. He says in verse 34, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all of these things take place. All the things that he's talking about here will take place. So this temple is to happen sometime within their lifetime. Now, what we want to do first then in showing, we're going to build a case and for this AD 70 and explaining exactly what that means and what, because obviously Jesus died in 33 AD, and now 70 AD is when the temple was destroyed by the Roman army. Was this prophesied elsewhere? That's the first question. You know, when we go to Deuteronomy chapter 8, we can start at verse 52. And I'm going to read some other things here, so you'll be able to put these pieces together. It says, "They shall besiege you in your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down throughout all your land." This is verse 52 of Deuteronomy 28. "And they shall besiege you in all your towns and throughout all your hand which the Lord God has given you. And you shall eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you, in the siege and in the distress which your enemies shall distress you. The man who is the most tender and refined among you will begrudge food to his brother, to the wife he embraces, and to the last of the children whom he has left, so that he will not give to any of them any of the flesh of his children whom he is eating, because he has nothing else left. In the siege and in the distress at which your enemies shall distress you in all your towns, the most tender and refined woman among you, who had not ventured to set the sole of her foot on the ground because she is so delicate and tender, will begrudge to the husband she embraces, to her son and to her daughter, her afterbirth that comes out from between her feet, and her children whom she bears, because lacking everything she will eat them secretly in the siege and in the distress with which your enemy shall distress you in your towns." Interesting, right? What a prophecy. Now, AD 70, we know from history, is when Jerusalem was destroyed, laid siege by the Roman army, and destroyed down. This is all recorded in what they call the complete works of Josephus, the War of the Jews. And he describes, now, Josephus was a historian. He was a Jewish historian. He was actually a Jewish leader. Was captured by the Romans, and he was set kind of like in favor of by the Romans to record everything that happens at the events that happened in Jerusalem, and it's being torn down. Now, what happened was, and I'll go through a long story short, is that the Romans, there was a group. We'll have to start back there. The Zealots. Remember Simon, the Zealot? There was a group of Zealots in there, and these outlaws that were causing problems for the Romans. They were harassing them, and in a couple places actually attacked their armies and defeated them. There was a big enough group. And the Romans finally said, "We've had enough of this." And so in about 66, they sent Vespasian, and then he had a son named Titus. They spent Vespasian to go down and take care of these problems. And for the next couple of years, they wandered throughout Jerusalem, trying to quell this rebellion that was going on. Now every city was part of it. Some of them opened their arms up to the Romans, said, "Come on in. We're not here to fight you." And those cities were usually given Roman citizenship to them. But many of the other ones, they fought against and fought with. So they went through all the towns, and finally the last one, of course, was Jerusalem. And they laid siege to it, which was common by the Romans. Now, in the book of the War of the Jews here, written by Josephus, he describes from the first day of when they laid the siege, how they built the barracks up, different events that went on, how the battle took place, what was going on. They give you information about the people. They show how they put up these banks that they kind of slowly worked their way towards the walls and started to tear it down and get into the city. Now, mind you, when this siege first took place, it was during the High Holy Days. There was well over, they're saying several 100,000 people there, possibly more, that were living in the city, and probably a whole lot more that were there in the city. and are living around it. But when the armies come in and they start marching in like lightning, nobody knows the day or the hour that they come. But all of a sudden, just imagine you're there celebrating holidays, and the next thing you know, you find out Roman armies are coming. So people fled the city, and others that were living outside the city fled into the city. So now you've got the city completely packed up and swelled up by the hundreds of thousands of people. The Christians, being forewarned, fled beforehand and escaped anything. The Eusebius and the others talk about how they fled to small town Pella and to escape all that went on. But now it's completely surrounded, as what they do, and then they start to battle against the armies and things. Now, there were some battles that took place. The Jewish armies were divided up into three. You had the high priests and all those with their armies, and the Sanhedrin and Pharisees had their kind of army. Then you had this name, several different groups that were fighting within the city, and one of those groups eventually attacked the priests and defeated them and their armies that were there inside the city. So you had internal fighting going on. And eventually those two were conquered, and all three were conquered, and Jerusalem was completely destroyed. Now, I want to read a little bit to you from Josephus. This is from chapter 4, I think, book 17 or 18. Chapter 3. Chapter 3, paragraph 3. 17:3 is how it would be. Now, of those that perished by famine in the city, the number was prodigious, and the miseries they underwent were unspeakable. For so much as the shadow of any kind of food did anywhere appear, a war was commenced presently, and the dearest friends fell fighting on one another about it, snatching from each other the most miserable supports of life. Nor would men believe that those were dying had no food, but the robbers would search them when they were expiring, lest anyone should have concealed food in their bosoms and counterfeited dying. You know, they were faking to be dead so somebody wouldn't kill them and thinking they might have food on them. Nay, the robbers gaped and ran about, stumbling and staggering around like mad dogs, and reeling against the doors of the house like drunken men. They would also, in the great distress they were in, rush into the very same houses 2 or 3 times in one and the same day. More of their hunger was so intolerable that it obliged them to chew everything while they gathered such things as the most sordid animals would not touch, and endured to eat them. Nor did they at length abstain from girdles, shoes, and the very leather which belonged to their shields they pulled off and gnawed. The very wisps of old hay became food to some, and some gathered up fibers, and sold a very small weight of them for 4 attic or drachma. But why do I describe these shameless imprudence that the famine brought to men in the eating intimate things? Well, I was going to rail a matter of fact, the like to which no history relates. Let me see here for a second. And it would be in what food she got me. She played the shit. Okay, here's the story. Now, I just read that to you from Deuteronomy, so I want to be sure I got the right one here. There was a certain woman that dwelt beyond Jordan. Her name was Mary. Her father was Eleazar of the village Bethzeb, which signified the house of hyssop. She was an eminent for her family and her wealth, and had fled away to Jerusalem with the rest of the multitude, and was with them when the besiege began. The other effects of this woman had already been seized upon, such as, she brought with her out of Perea, and removed to the city, which she had treasured up beside. And also what food she had contrived to save had been also carried off by the guards, who came every day running into her house for that purpose. This put the poor woman to a very great passion, and by the frequent reproaches and precautions she cast on these rapacious villains, she had provoked them to anger against her. But none of them, either of the indignation she had raised against herself or the commiserate of her case, would take away her life. And if she found any food, she perceived her labors were for others, and not for herself. And it was now become impossible for her anyway to find any more food. Now while the famine pierced through her very bowels and marrow, and when her passions were fired to a degree beyond the famine itself, nor did she consult with anything but with her passion and the necessity she was in, she then attempted a most unnatural thing. And snatching up her son, who was a child sucking at her breast, she said, O you miserable infant, for whom shall I preserve thee in the war, this famine and this sedition? And as to the war with the Romans, if they preserve our lives, we will be slaves. This famine also will destroy us, either before the slavery comes upon us. Yet are the sedition rogues more terrible than both the other. Come on, be thou my food, and be thou a fury to the sedition varlets and bywords of the world. So as soon as she said this, she slew her son and roasted him, and ate one half of him, and kept the other half by her concealed. Now, there it is. There's you shall eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and your daughters. Verse 53 of Deuteronomy 20. Here it is being fulfilled. Upon the sedition came in presently, and smelling the horrid scent of this food, they threatened her. They would cut her throat immediately if she did not show them what food she had gotten ready. And she replied that she had saved a very fine portion of it for them, and withal uncovered what was left of her son. Hereupon they were seized with horror and amazement of mind, and stood astonished at the sight. And when she said to them, This is my own son, and what has been done was my own doing. Come, eat of this food, for I have eaten of it myself. Do not pretend to be either more tender than a woman, or more compassionate than a mother. But if you be so scrupulous and do abominate this my sacrifice, as I have eaten the one half, let the rest be reserved for me also. After which those men went out trembling, being never so much affrighted as anything as there was as this, and with some difficulty left the rest of that meat to the mother. Upon which the whole city was full of this horrid actions immediately. And while everybody laid his miserable case before their own eyes, they trembled, as if this unheard of action had been by themselves. So that were they distressed by the famine, were very desirous to die, and those already dead were esteemed happy, because they had not lived long enough to either to hear or to see such miseries. So this siege went on for basically 42 months, 3.5 years. And in 70 A.D., the temple finally fell. The Roman armies entered in and destroyed all that was going through there. And I'm looking at Matthew 24. And he starts to talk about, okay, how do you know? Well, you want to know when this is going to end? Well, there's going to be many who come in my name saying, I am Christ, and they will lead man astray. There were several people, and Josephus mentions these people, where their name is Jesus, and they assume to be leaders. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, and that was, of course, you don't have television back then, of course, but you had people telling about the wars that were going on with the Romans coming in and taking things over. But don't be alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. During that time there were several large earthquakes that took place. And, of course, the people here are hearing about these things. And all these are the beginning of the birth pains, meaning this is all leading to its destruction. Now, as Christians, you're going to be delivered up to tribulation and put to death. You will be hated by all nations for my name's sake, and many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And we know this all happened. It's chronicled in Acts, these false teachers and different people who led people astray, such as Hymenaeus and Philetus, who said that the resurrection was past. There were people that were doing that. And then because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. Remember, in Revelations, one of the warnings to the churches is because your love has grown cold, you've lost your first love. That significantly happened. 13, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the King will be proclaimed through the whole world as a testament to all nations, and then the end will come. And that was fulfilled, I would believe and assume, when Paul, you have the whole Roman world, you have Paul who preached before Nero and gave the message to all of them as he was being led to Rome. Different leaders saw him and heard him. So this message was preached all the way throughout the whole known Roman world. Finally, you get to 15. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place. Now this comes from Daniel 9. it talks about this abomination. Let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains. Let the ones who are on the housetop go down and take what is in left. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days. See, there's that tie-in again. Pray that your flight not be in a winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And of course, we are talking about the siege of Jerusalem. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would have been saved. In other words, that siege would have gone on much longer. Everybody would have died. But for the sake of the elect, the sake of those not Christians, but of those Jews that were there, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says, look, here is Christ, there is a do not believe it. For false Christ and false prophet was rife and performed great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. They have recorded in there one man that went around talking about the end of the world, and he's the original guy who, it's the end of the world. The end of the world is here. That preached that and said some interesting things happened. But Josephus records this guy and what happened to him finally. So if people tell you, hey, look, he's in the wilderness, don't go out. If they look, say he's in the inner rooms, don't believe. For his lightning comes from the east and west and shines for the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there will the bad vultures gather. Now, we have talked about this before. The coming of the Son of Man is the coming Son of Man coming in judgment. And this was one of our last podcasts that we talked about. That when Jesus was talking about this, he was not talking about his second coming, but the coming of judgment. Because Jesus ascended to the right hand of the throne, sat down with the Father, was given all authority, he pronounced judgment over Israel and Jerusalem, and this is the direct fulfillment of that prophecy, of course, recorded here and in Daniel and in Deuteronomy 28 with Moses. So it's lightning comes from the east and west. That is exactly how the Roman army came. I mean, boom, one day you're up and going. The next thing you know, you wake up and your whole city is completely surrounded by this army. Terrible thing. So after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be dark and the moon will not give its light and the stars will fall from heaven. Powers of the heavens will be shaken. That means there's going to be quite a shakeup in the region. And that's technically what it's talking about. The leaders and the things. It's an imagery thing that's going on. Then will appear in the heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And the way they describe that, let's put it this way. There appears, and Josephus records that while this battle was taking place, I believe even Tacitus mentioned something about this, that in the skies overhead they saw clouds swirling, and when the temple fell, and different supernatural things like that were going on. And they said they actually thought they saw angels riding in chariots through these clouds. So they believe that there was something that went on, but that would be the sign of the Son of Man, that all the tribes of the earth will mourn because they're seeing the temple being destroyed, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds, and that judgment will come. And of course, the people would mourn, and as their temple would be destroyed and the city destroyed. Then he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the other to the other. And this is the angels gathering over. Now, he goes on that, no one knows the days of the hour, all these things you hear. I mean, there's kind of a switch in it, but it does say, again, of course, in 34, all these things will come upon this generation. Now, some like to switch and say, the rest of it goes on to talk about the second coming. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. For in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, but that is not the case. There is nothing in there that is really talking about the second coming, as we talked about in our last episodes. So what we have here is the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, people recorded it afterwards, like Barnabas recorded the destruction. Josephus is the one and who talks about it and mentions that this was a fulfillment of the prophecy of Jesus. And this is the time that was all done. So how do we get up here? And how did they get to this point now where you've got these different views about the millennium and when all this is going to take place and when is this destruction of the temple going to happen now. I want to make clear a couple of things, and you'll see the rationale in this. If you go back to chapter 23, at the end of it, it says in verse 20, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we have not taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of them you kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute you from town to town." Now this describes Acts perfectly. Paul, he got flogged, he got stoned to death. They continued to do it. And Jews chased Paul down from town to town because they rejected Jesus. So, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to blood of Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. So this judgment was to come upon this generation, and AD 70 is a fulfillment of this. So you go in Matthew 24, you hear all those things. It is all fulfilled. Everything about Matthew 24, all these warnings, the abomination of desolation, all of these things were all fulfilled. So I go back and I ask you why. Here we are 2,000 years later. The different views, some people suggest that all of the Olivet is to be fulfilled in the future. Just before Jesus comes, because Matthew talks about the temple being torn down, therefore the temple has to be rebuilt. In order to be torn down and attacked, it's going to have to be rebuilt, right? So that's why they all look forward to the temple being rebuilt, why you keep hearing about this. Then, I'm adjusting my mic here, a little bit of noise. Then, lose my train of thought for a second here. They're talking about 1948, when Israel again was regathered, therefore the temple has to be built. In the Revelation narrative, it's going to be destroyed again. But if you examine Revelation, there is no place where it talks about the city and the nation of Israel or Jerusalem being torn down again. There is no sense in which it is destroyed. It doesn't happen, people. I hate to tell people that, but that is the truth. It never gets torn down again. None of this is going to happen. Everything that you read in Matthew 24, 25 is not going to happen in the end of time. That is the problem, because the issue of Revelation is that it talks about worldwide, many nations, Jews and Christians that are being persecuted in this tribulation. Numbers so great you can't even count them, and it goes on in Revelations. So it has nothing to do with that. And that is the problem, because I've been doing my research for my PhD, and I'm going back to books as far back as 1866. I have one from 1871, 1878, that they were talking about these issues, and about Matthew 24, the Olivet being fulfilled, and when it was going to be fulfilled. And there were split opinions, granted, all the way up to 325. People said, well, that was fulfilled in AD 70. And others says, no, that's still future. So that continues on. Most relevant, of course, is to dispensationalism and what they call premillennialism, of which I stand up and support. Which basically means is that you're going to have these 7 years of tribulation. Christ's return sets up a millennial kingdom. At the end of the kingdom, they gather, another army gathers under Satan's direction. The battle, that's the end of everything. You have the great white throne judgment, and it comes the new heaven and the new earth. Post-millennial, all millennial kind of believe that we're in this 1,000-year millennial kingdom right now, but we can show biblically why that's not true, and that will be a subject for another topic, of course, when we deal with the millennium. Then there's the other views of partial preterism that believes that the majority, because the majority of the Olivet was fulfilled, therefore the end of days is talking, Revelation is all about all the end of these days. Therefore, they have to make Revelation about 70 AD. And so they believe, partial believes, it talks about the destruction of Jerusalem, on and on and on. But of course, the second coming hasn't happened yet. So they put a 2,000-year period between the destruction and Nero being the beast and Christ coming back, 2,000 whatever years later that it's going to be. And they separate the two. Full preterism, of course, believes that everything in Revelations, the second coming, judgment, new heavens and earth, all happened in 70 AD. And that is what I deal with in my Yeller Moon podcast. I call them yellow because they're cowards. Anyway, we directly refute those claims of partial preterists and everything. They claim to be Christians. They claim to come out of the Church of Christ, most of them. But it basically, it's a deception that is sweeping and causing apostasy in the churches all the way across. And I will get into that again in another podcast and talk about it there. So if I was to kind of wrap this up a little bit here, the idea is that, okay, so when people come to you and ask you about, well, the Olivet has got to be, people will claim, well, we hear about rumors and wars now. Nation rising, we hear about those things now. Those are all things. We have famines and earthquakes. See, the predictions of Matthew 24 come true. They will deliver you up to tribulation, put you to death, and betray one another. Lawlessness will... Yes, those things are all true back then. They're all going to be true in the future. There's a little bit of that foreshadowing going on. But why in the world, 2,000 years later, would or does Jerusalem have to be destroyed again? What did she do so wrong that God is going to judge her in these days? Think about what's going on in Israel right now. They're not saved. The nation hasn't come to the Lord in any by means or anything else. So why? They're just like any other nation. So do you see judgment coming down on Assyria? Do you see judgment coming down on any other Muslim nations like Turkey or whatever? Do you see it going on? No. So why should it just happen to Israel and Jerusalem alone? See, that's an inconsistency that people, they can't answer when they look at it logically. There's no reason for Jerusalem to be judged in that way and be destroyed again. In fact, here's, and I know I've talked about this before and I will continue to talk about it. In Zechariah 12 and 14, you have two prophecies concerning the second coming, the day that it comes. But it starts out in both chapters. It talks about the siege of Jerusalem. Okay, there's that key word again. Deuteronomy 28. When they besiege you in all your towns. Matthew 24. When they surround you like lightning. And you see the, abomination, desolation that happens. The siege of Jerusalem. Again, every stone will be torn down. You read Josephus. That's what it's all about. That's what happens. Even Tacitus, who was a Roman historian, recorded this. They've lost a lot of the scrolls, heavily damaged, but what they do have, they can read, and they understand and see that it is part about the Jewish wars that he talked about. But in verse 2, the siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah. On that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the people who lift it will surely hurt themselves. So get the idea that you come and attack Jerusalem and you siege it. Well, there's going to be coming a day when you're going to get hurt. Like somebody trying to pick up a stone that's too big, you're going to hurt yourself. So all the nations of the earth will gather against it. Now on that day, declares the Lord, I will strike every horse with panic, and it goes through there. Now this is all imagery, of course, so I don't think Zechariah or Daniel or anybody else is seeing helicopters and tanks and things like this. They're seeing things that they can understand. Now, on this, after this siege, then, I'm going to show you here real quick why it is a different day. It can't be the same day. And here's why. The inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength for the Lord of hosts, their God. Did they have strength in 70 AD? No. God is the one who brought the judgment by sending the Roman army to destroy them. So why would God give them strength? Didn't do it. They should devour to the right and left all the surrounding people, while Jerusalem shall again be inhabited in its place in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was destroyed, hasn't been inhabited, hasn't been part of Israel or the nation of Israel until 1948, has it? The Lord will give salvation to the tents of Judah first, and the glory of the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not surpass that of Judah. Really? Salvation to the tents? No, he brought judgment against them. He destroyed them. Verse 8 of chapter 12 of Zechariah. On that day the Lord will protect the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now that's key. Now that is absolutely key. I'm going to go to the 14th, but hold that thought for 1 second, because when we go down to verse 10, and I will pour on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy. Grace and mercy. The inhabitants will ask for grace and mercy. Did that happen? Were they given any in 70 AD? No. So that when they look on me and whom they have pierced, they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over a firstborn. Powerful. Powerful. What happened when Jesus was born? Herod sought to kill all the kids from Bethlehem, and he did. They killed him. As one weeps over a firstborn. This is also, image goes over to what? Moses. They tried to kill the firstborn throughout the land of Israel, the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were at, the Hebrew people. On the day of his coming then, what's going to happen? They will look on me, who? Jesus, who they have pierced. Okay? They shall mourn for him. So on the day of his coming, when he comes to this great display of glory and power, you will see the resurrection. Those who are alive will be changed. What happens? The tribes and the nations of Israel will look on him who they have pierced. They will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child. Mourn for him and weep bitterly, because what? They will recognize that it was him, Jesus, that they've rejected for 2,000 years, was the Messiah they had been looking for. Romans 11. Paul says that in that day when that happens, all of Israel will be saved. I thoroughly believe, this is Revelation 6 or 7 or so, it talks about the 144,000. There will be, every tribe that will see them. You will see the Jews in mass repenting and mourning, because they know now what they did 2,000 years ago. And God will bring them in. I believe that there'll be hundreds of thousands that will be saved of the Jews. I mean, just imagine that sun display. If Jesus already showed up, and he shows up in Jerusalem, where his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. Let's go to verse 14. One last thing I think here. I'll just remember, Jerusalem shall be inhabited, please. On that day the Lord will protect the inhabitants, so that the feeblest of them will be like the house of David. Okay, let's go to chapter 14. Again, it starts off, the city will be taken, the houses plundered, women will be raped. Half the city shall go into exile, but the rest of the people shall not be cut off from the city. So half the city went into exile. There was a lot of people that went into, but the rest of the people shall not be cut off. Somebody tried to suggest they'll stay there in the homes, but there were people that stayed behind and got scattered, but the majority of the people were killed. So then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations when he fights on a day of battle. On that day, his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives. Acts 1. This Jesus left from Mount Olives, he will come back. That lies before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley. So the day he comes, there's a great earthquake there. And then that the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him, all of his saints, all of his people. This is the description of what takes place in the rapture, and how the saints who are alive and those who have died are raised, changed, and brought together. So on that day there will be no light, cold, or frost. There will be a unique day which is known to the Lord. Neither day or night, but evening there shall be light. So, man, this is going to be something else when there's just light the whole day, right? Living waters will flow out of Jerusalem, half to the eastern sea and half to the western sea, and it will continue in summer as in winter. So we're talking about this water breaking forth into this land. And the Lord will be king over all the earth, and on that day he will be one and his name one, which means when he comes back, remember it was a one world system under the beast. Here it's Jesus who comes back and is Lord over the whole world. This army that gathered against him, he defeats it, and he becomes king over the whole earth. Verse 10, but Jerusalem shall remain aloft in sight in its place. It shall be in heaven, for there shall never again be a decree of utter destruction. Jerusalem shall dwell in security. Now, has Jerusalem dwelt in security since AD 70? No. So we're talking about the day in which Jesus comes. It will dwell in security for that. There will never, after that last siege and what happened, there will never again be another degree of utter destruction. This is why you cannot have a command for Jerusalem to be destroyed in Revelation. You can't do it. There's never going to be another decree. And the last decree that happens, of course, is by Jesus himself in Matthew 24. But there will never be, again, another decree. These are two prophecies of the same thing. Israel and Judah will fight and everything. And then verse 16, that everyone who survives of all the nations that came against Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts. And this is where we say comes in the millennium. Christ returns to Jerusalem, sets up his kingdom there, and from there he rules over all of the nations of the whole world. And they will come year after year. There will be Christians and non-Christians living together. That will be our vindication. Us Christians who lived and survived, we will rule and reign with him. They've had their good now, but during this 1,000 years, think about it. Most of these people, these rich people, only enjoy everything for maybe 60, 70 years, whatever it might be that they're rich. They get their fame and their fortune, for these 60 years. But us, in these resurrected bodies, ruling and reigning with him for 1,000 years, not 60 or 7. So Christians need to understand that and kind of get that in their mind that yes, it is hard right now, but in a few years when this all takes place, we will be the ones who will rule and reign and be vindicated by what we have held on to and believed. All right, I'm going to close it down at this time. We got about a minute left and a half or something like that. So a little bit of Christmas music. Thank you guys for joining me today, listening. And I hope this was beneficial. If you guys could drop me a note, that would be great. I will have it on YouTube as well for you to hear. So if you don't mind, subscribe and listen and tell your friends about it. We appreciate it. All right. We'll catch you on the backside.